Today we will discuss about comparative cost advantage theory of international trade by David Ricardo. In the previous class we have discussed about absolute cost advantage theory by Adam Smith. Adam Smith in his theory propagated that a country can specialize in a commodity in which they have absolute cost advantage. They can produce that in more, they can specialize that commodity and produce that more, and then export that commodities and earn cash inflow. That was a base for absolute cost advantage theory. But according to Ricardo, that was very unrealistic assumptions to make, because you cannot expect a country to have absolute advantage over a product. He said that David Ricardo had an opinion that international trade is governed by comparative cost advantage rather than absolute cost advantage. When we compare both countries and it is cheaper to produce in one of the country, then we can produce that commodity, rather than we cannot compare the cost within the country. So the absolute advantage over a particular commodity within the country is something wrong to assume, is what David Ricardo felt like. So when he questioned Adam Smith that what if a country enjoys absolute advantage over two commodities? What if a country doesn't have absolute advantage on any of the commodities? What if the capital is so scarce that they have to be very careful while allocating to the commodity production? Let me explain it through an example. Suppose we are taking India. India is a nation where we are blessed with tropical climate, and we can produce many of our agriculture produce can be produced at very cheaper cost than that of the other countries. That means we enjoy absolute cost advantage over so many agriculture products. Here I am just taking two products, rice and wheat. Suppose India is having absolute cost advantage over both these commodities. Rice, India can produce rice and India can produce wheat in a cheap way better than that of other countries. So India has to decide upon which product to produce, rice or wheat. India has to decide on how to allocate their scarce resources on rice and wheat, right? So suppose like you know that in India, southern part of India, the states like Andhra Pradesh are really good in producing rice. At the same time, in the same country, parts like Punjab, northern part, Punjab state is good in producing wheat. So we cannot label a country that a country is just good in producing one commodity. We may enjoy absolute advantage over one or two commodities. What to do at that period of time? Which commodity we should specialize and produce is what David Ricardo's question about absolute cost advantage theory, which led to the formation of comparative cost advantage. Let's see the example which is being given in the slide. India enjoys absolute advantage over rice, where the cost of production for producing rice is 50 rupee. Just take it as an example, 50 rupee per kg. And producing wheat, the cost of production in India is 90 rupee. And we are taking another nation, we are taking US. When in terms of US doesn't enjoy absolute advantage over neither rice nor wheat, because when we compare it with India, it is costly to produce rice and wheat in US. It doesn't have advantage over any of the product, any of these two product, rice and wheat. See, the cost of production of rice to be produced in US is 150 rupee, and for wheat the cost of production to be produced in US is 100 rupee. It is clearly seen that India enjoys an absolute advantage over both rice and wheat. Now India need to decide upon which one to produce in the country and which commodity need to be imported from US. Okay, because a country cannot produce both the commodity. The assumption is that country should not produce both the commodity because we have scarce resources. We need to divide the scarce resources in such a way that we gain from that. We have studied in absolute advantage theory, one separate column was there in that table where domestic exchange ratio was shown. Suppose there is no international trade and we are allocating our scarce resources towards rice and wheat equally, and we are not gaining anything from international trade, which will reduce our GDP or reduce our income flow into the economy, wherein we know that we are good in rice and wheat, and suppose we are only concentrating on rice and specializing that in more and then exporting the rest of it to the other world and getting more gain from international trade, and at the same time we are not producing wheat, we are importing it from US. If that is there, and to the money which we give to US for importing wheat is much lesser than that of the gain which we received from the trade surplus by exporting rice. So we are gaining here, we are spending less on wheat but we are gaining more on rice. If that is the condition, international trade will be really profitable according to David Ricardo. See, so India will specialize in rice. Why? Because it has greater comparative advantage. See the cost of production of rice in India and the cost of production of rice in US. Cost of production of rice in India is 50, whereas cost of production of rice in US is 150. The difference is 100. So better concentrate on rice and produce it more. There is no point in importing it from US because it's really very costly if we import it from US. Now compare the wheat. Cost of production in India is 90. Cost of production of wheat in US is 100. Right? What is the difference? 10. That means even though it is not that costly to import wheat from US, so that means US is having least comparative disadvantage. Of course there is disadvantage because if we produce wheat in India it is just 90, but if we are importing it from US we have to give 100 rupee, but it is just a matter of 10 rupee in between. The difference is just 10, which we can overcome with the trade surplus we do with rice, because we are getting almost 100 trade surplus with rice if we are specializing in rice, right? So David Ricardo said that instead of going for absolute cost advantage, let's take two countries and compare their cost of production with each other, and let's see in which country can produce comparatively lesser cost of production we can import from that country, and channelize our scarce resources to something which we are really good at, or we enjoy absolute or greater comparative advantage in that product. Here it is rice. So let's not waste our scarce capital resource by allocating for both rice and wheat. Let us concentrate or specialize on rice and produce more of rice and export it to US. At the same time, we can import the wheat from US because it's just a matter of 10 rupee. Right? Because even if we produce wheat in our country, it is 90. If we import it from US, it is 100. क्या फ़र्क पड़ता है? There is no much difference. Just 10 is basic difference. So it is better to import wheat from US and produce and specialize more in rice, because for rice we have greater comparative advantage and US has the least comparative disadvantage over wheat, right? So this is the gist of comparative cost advantage theory. You can see that quoted explanation of David Ricardo on the theory. A country will specialize in the production and export of a particular commodity in which it has greater comparative advantage and least comparative disadvantage, right? I will explain it in more analytical way. That India and US is a bit hypothetical thing which you can write when you're writing the meaning of the theory. And here goes the analytical explanation for comparative cost theory. Here we are considering two countries. Just like the previous absolute cost theory, Ricardo also assumed that it is a 2 into 2 model. That is, two country, two product, and one cost of production, and cost of production is being measured through labor cost. These are the assumptions of comparative cost advantage, which has been shown in the table. You can see that there are two countries involved, Portugal and England. There are two products which is being involved in international trade, wine and clothes, and the only cost of production is said to be labor cost, which is measured through the hours required or hours dedicated by labor to produce 1 unit of the commodity. So it is the working hours which is being measuring the cost of production, right? And you can see the domestic exchange ratio, that if there is absence of international trade, how much of goods will earn the other commodity. Internal trade is what being shown through domestic exchange ratio. So for one wine, how much of cloth we will get within Portugal if we are not trading it with England, right? That is domestic exchange ratio. Now let's start. Just like we explained the India and US case, same thing I have repeated here. Portugal can produce wine at the rate of 80. See, in Portugal, the production of 1 unit of wine cost 80 labor hours, and production of 1 unit of cloth cost 90 labor hours. Let's go to the England. In England, the production of 1 unit of wine cost 120 labor hours, and production of 1 unit of cloth cost 100 labor hours. So that is, it is very clear that cost of producing both the commodities, that is both wine and cloth, is very cheap in Portugal, or Portugal enjoys an absolute cost advantage in producing both the commodities, that is wine and cloth. However, on the basis of comparative cost ratio, we are trying to see we are trying to calculate the comparative cost ratio of both the countries, right? So even before going to domestic exchange ratio, we will just move over to the next. There is some alignment issue, but I will repeat that. So consider this table. Here what is being done is, Portugal, we are like one of the line is beneath the table, so I will just repeat that one. What we are trying to see through this table is, we are trying to analyze how much of labor cost will incur to Portugal if they calculate on the basis of England's labor cost. Okay, so we are trying to calculate on the basis of the labor cost involved in England. Let's just start with Portugal now. Portugal requires, and we are taking ratio, so we are comparing it with the cost of England's labor cost, right? So we know that the labor cost in Portugal is 80, which has been divided by 120, that is the labor cost of England. So we are taking a ratio for Portugal's cost of production and England's cost of production, labor cost. Okay, and we get 67%. That means Portugal requires 67% of England's labor cost to produce 1 unit of wine. Okay, so basically this table we are trying to compare the cost between these two countries. How much of labor cost will be incurred to Portugal if they are calculating their cost of production on the basis of England's labor cost? I'll make it more clear. let's take like England take, it's very clear that England takes more hours to produce wine. So it is more costly to produce wine in England. So that cost is being taken by Portugal for comparing it with England. Suppose labors in England is paid. Let me just clear the confusion of different currency in different nation. We will just take dollar as a common currency. Suppose labor in England is paid $10 for this 120 hours. So England requires 120 hours to produce 1 unit of wine, and they are paying $10 for laborers. Portugal is taking this $10 and calculating it with 80 hours. When we calculate that, 67%, Portugal requires 67% of England's labor cost to produce 1 unit of wine. Still, it is very cheap to produce in England. Even if we take the wages of England and calculate, then also it is very cheap to produce in Portugal. And you can see that when it comes to clothes, they are comparing between two commodities now. You know that the cost of production of producing 1 unit of cloth in Portugal is 90, which is being divided by 100. 100 is the cost of production of 1 unit of cloth for England. So 90 divided by 100, 90 is the cost of production of Portugal and 100 is the cost of production of England, which comes to 90%. That means 90% of England's labor cost is required to produce 1 unit of cloth. When we compare these two commodities, it is very clear that Portugal is more comparatively efficient in producing wine than cloth. So it will concentrate on wine. Okay. Now let's go to England. Same way we are taking England. England requires 150% of Portugal's labor cost to produce 1 unit of wine. See, 120 divided by 80. 120 is the cost of production of wine in England, which is divided by cost of production of wine in Portugal, and which has been converted into percentage, that is 150%. So now England is calculating, it is very costly to produce wine in England. See, 150%. So you know that labor cost will be less in Portugal. Even if they take that cheap labor cost while calculating the cost of production, still it is very costly to produce wine in England. Suppose England is just paying, Portugal is just paying $5 labor cost in Portugal for producing wine. Even if we take that $5 and calculate in England, still the cost is more. That means England doesn't have any efficiency in producing wine. It is very costly for production of wine in England. Same way when you take clothes, 100 is the cost of production of cloth in England and 90 is the cost of production of cloth in Portugal. That is 100 divided by 90. The ratio is being calculated and converted into percentage, which comes to 111%. That means 111% of Portugal's labor cost to produce 1 unit of cloth. Even though it is more than that of Portugal it is 90% and for England it is 111. That doesn't make a big difference. England has least comparative disadvantage in cloth. So when we compare two commodities, if given a choice for England whether to produce wine and cloth, of course England will choose cloth because it is having least comparative disadvantage over producing cloth than wine. So this percentage and this calculation is comparative cost ratio, which basically means that we are taking the labor cost of other nation and trying to calculate the cost of production in our nation. Suppose England is paying $10 for labor. That $10 is being taken by Portugal to calculate the cost of production, not the labor cost which Portugal themselves are giving. They will take it from England and see they are giving $10, so let me just calculate my cost of production on the basis of that $10, and then calculate, still it's being cheap, okay chalo, we will concentrate more on production of wine. So this is how comparative cost ratios are being classified, which means that gain for Portugal is more while doing business with wine. See the domestic exchange ratio over here. If we give one wine internally, there is no international trade happening. So suppose if there is no international trade happening and everything is happening within Portugal, then for one wine we will get 0.89 cloth, right? But if we are going for an international trade with England, one wine will give us 1.2 cloth. So it is better to go for international trade. Gain for Portugal, that is 1.2 cloth minus 0.89 cloth, that is 0.31 cloth, can be gained if we are indulging in trade with England. Same will be the case for gain for England. If England is not indulging in international trade and everything is happening within England, they are not, internal trade is happening now, that means for one cloth we will just, that is England will just get 0.83 wine. But if they are indulging into an international trade with Portugal, for one cloth they may get 1.13 wine. So 1.13 wine minus 0.83 wine, which is 0.30 wine, is the gain which England would get if they are entering into international trade with Portugal. So it is better to enter into international trade for both the countries, comparing the cost and seeing who enjoys greater comparative advantage on what commodity. And even if they have absolute advantage over other commodity, let's not produce that. Let's just import it from the nation which has least comparative disadvantage on that product, and thus gain from international trade.